Hello and welcome. It is the final episode of this season of Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. Glad to have everybody along for the ride here. Todd said before the season in our first episode that this was going to be one of the most memorable and different and unique college football seasons
Right.
that we've had in recent memory. And I'd say it lived up to the billing as we now are ready to embark on this first 12-team playoff. And we really got a bunch of great conference championship games,
Yep.
including the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, all of them really, except for one, except for the first one
Yep.
was compelling. Arizona State was dominant in theirs, and all the other ones were nail biters. So, I mean, the Big Ten game was great TV. It was a lot of exciting offensive football. Neither team really had answers defensively for the opponent. Um, but Oregon did what they've done all year. They found a way to win, and they outlasted Penn State in a game where Penn State, to me, showed more in that loss than they had showed in any game, any win
Yeah.
on their schedule prior to that. Now, offensively, I thought offensively they were magnificent, despite the fact that Drew Aller threw a couple costly interceptions. But beyond that, they were creative, they were explosive, they were powerful, and they gave Oregon everything that they could handle in that game. So a lot of confidence on the offensive side going into the playoff, I think, for Penn State. And again, both teams defensively struggled. I would be concerned a little bit on the Oregon side on their run defense because they had not really been exposed until this game. And Penn State ran for nearly 300 yards against them. Both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton both gained over 100 yards. Drew Aller chipped in 50 something on the ground. But once again, as we've seen all year, Dylan Gabriel was brilliant. I mean, he was magnificent. Completed almost 70% of his passes, threw 4 touchdowns, in complete control. Tez Johnson, Penn State doesn't have a guy like Tez Johnson.
No.
They don't have a wideout who can change the game like Tez Johnson did with 11 catches and over 180 yards. Tyler Warren was brilliant as he's been all season, but he's not as explosive of a receiver as a guy like Tez Johnson. So at the end of the day, the better team won, but Penn State should feel pretty good about themselves heading into the playoff game on the offensive side of the ball.
I'm glad you brought up Tez because he had missed a couple of weeks and you were curious, would he still be the factor that he had been early in the season to the same
Yeah.
degree that he had been capable of contributing consistently? Clearly proved that in this game with just an outstanding day. Had 11 catches, 181 yards, 2 touchdowns on the day. We're going to get to the college football playoff bracket in a little bit here, but the Oregon path and conversation is fascinating as the only
Yeah.
undefeated team in the country and the number one overall seed. But again, Penn State proved a lot. There's a reason that they didn't really drop all that much in the college football playoff final rankings, and they're going to be hosting that first round game. Other news across the Big Ten at the end of this regular season and conference championship week: Dylan Gabriel named to one of the 4 Heisman finalists.
Yep.
It's him, Ashton Genty, Travis Hunter, Cam Ward, all going to New York. And you just brought him up and how brilliant he's been. I'd make the argument. I don't even know how much of an argument it is at this point because I think it's pretty much set in stone. He's got to be the most reliable quarterback remaining in this college football playoff field. You just know exactly what you're going to get every week.
Yep. Yeah, and he's so unflappable and so cool. And even when he makes a mistake, because he's thrown interceptions in the red zone and he just comes right back. Nothing phases him, nothing distracts him from the mission. Uh, Tremendous leadership traits and skills, which you see all the time. And just the way that he relates to his teammates relate to him. He's been fun to watch. I mean, he's had a brilliant career, but I think this has been his best ever in his final year of college football.
Absolute masterpiece. The other bit of news: Barry Odom, former Mizzou head coach, now a
Yeah.
former UNLV head coach, will be the new head man at Purdue after Ryan Walters was let go following his second season.
Yeah. And I feel bad for Ryan Walters. I mean, he's a good football coach. He was an outstanding defensive coordinator at Illinois before he took this job. And things just didn't go well for him. But he still has a bright future. He's a young guy, still has a bright future in the coaching profession. The difference, a lot of times, if you have a defensive guy who gets fired or let go or leaves, the next guy coming in is an offensive minded guy.
Yeah.
That's not the case. Barry Odom is a defensive guy. The difference is Barry Odom is a proven head coach as well.
Right.
So the fact that you're bringing in a guy who's been there, done that as a head coach, I think it's going to bode well for Purdue going forward. But obviously, he's got a lot of rebuilding to do, both physically, emotionally, mentally, with what he inherits there in West Lafayette.
We shall see as they head into the season. So let's talk about the Big Ten teams in the college football playoff. We'll start with your alma mater because this is the fascinating conversation. It's the
Mm-hmm.
first year of this new model of the 12 teams, and the biggest conversation is seemingly surrounding the buys and who's getting the buys. And it was automatic to the conference champs, the top four conference
Right.
champs. We're going to automatically get buys. So we saw that for Oregon as the top seed, but we've seen it for teams like Boise State and Arizona State as well. And as a result, you have a team like Penn State who loses their conference championship game, has the number 6 seed,
Right.
and their path looks really excellent so far. You've got SMU, who was the last team at large bid in, and then the winner of that game will face the group of 5 school in Boise
Yeah.
State. So interesting to see how it all developed with the bracket.
Yeah, and really, a couple weeks ago, it was the number 5 seed that was going to apparently have that best path or that easiest path. Look, there is no easy path. Okay, I
Sure.
mean SMU showed a lot in the way they came back in Charlotte. I mean, they were down 24-7 at halftime, and they battled back. Their quarterback Kevin Jennings is a very special player. They've had a very special season. Yes, they'll be the underdogs going into State College, playing a December home game in Happy Valley. I mean, it'll be the coldest game that any of those guys on SMU's team have ever played in. But they're a good quality football team, and Penn State's going to have to put their best foot forward and play their A game in that. But just on the if you look at it on the surface, you say, yeah, Penn State's path is a pretty good one at that number 6 seed, but they're still going to have to play good football.
1000%. There's a reason that everybody's in this bracket. No question about that. And Boise State, by the way, they've beaten everybody except for the number 1 team in the
Right.
country on the road on a last second field goal.
Right.
So we're
Right.
talking about a team that can clearly compete with the top line of college football. Speaking of number 1 Oregon, they're going to get the winner of maybe one of the most intriguing, if not the most intriguing first round matchups. You've got number 9 Tennessee going to Columbus to take on number 8 Ohio State. I know this is what you loved about the new model is that we get
Yeah.
these home games and you're going to have this crazy atmosphere at the shoe. Everybody's going to be just off the chain, losing their minds. And especially for a game like this one should be a
Yeah.
lot of fun.
Yeah, it will be. I mean, Tennessee is a very, very talented team, great team speed, outstanding defense. They can run the football. So this will be a real test for Ohio State. But I like the Buckeyes in this one.
Yes.
I mean, I just think that they've had time to kind of distance themselves from the disappointment of the Michigan game. Get that sour taste out of their mouth. Realize that everything that they really want to do, aside from winning that game, is still ahead of them. They're in the playoffs. They're hosting a playoff game. And I just think that their veteran presence, the presence of veterans on their defense, will be the difference in this game. Tennessee starting the freshman quarterback, Nico. I actually wrote down Iuma Leava. Is that right? Iuma Leava. Nico Iuma Leava. Very, very talented guy, but he is a freshman
Well, we call
going
him
into
Nico.
Columbus. Nico going into Columbus to play a very veteran defensive football team, and I think that'll be the difference in the ball game.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. That Ohio State defense all season, and even in that Michigan game, like
Yeah,
they've been outstanding. And Jim Knowles has gotten them at playing at a level that really is among the top in the country. Again, the winner of that game faces Oregon. We potentially have the rematch of Ohio State and Oregon in the quarterfinals. And then the last Big Ten team to make it of the 4 would be Indiana, which we had a feeling was going to happen given what the rankings looked
right,
like before the conference championship week. They aren't going to host. They were very close to being a hosting team, but they do get to travel nearby
right.
in state against Notre Dame in South
Yeah.
Bend. This one should be fun as well.
Yeah, it really should be. I mean, it's a bus trip, so that logistically that takes a lot of the stuff out of it. You don't have to worry about your plane getting delayed. You don't have to worry about traffic, getting from the airport to the hotel and all that. So, and it'll be an interesting matchup. And even though they're both in the same state, they really have not played that many times in their history. So this is a game that should be a lot of fun. I think Notre Dame is playing. We saw them a couple times down the stretch. They're playing as good as anybody in college football right now.
Yeah.
I just think that they've been able to really bounce back from that heartbreaking loss to Northern Illinois that at that time everybody thought there's no way they make it to the playoffs because they can't win a conference. They're not in a conference. They can't host a game. They have to get an at-large. But they have put together a string of some really, really good football, and I think they're playing their best right now.
Yeah, these two teams, I feel like the conversation surrounding them has been similar down the stretch this season, where they've beaten up on a lot of teams that people don't deem to be all that great, but they've
Yeah,
dominated that competition. It's not
right.
that they haven't slimly escaped with wins. They have absolutely pummeled whoever's been in front of them. It'll be fascinating to watch this Indiana team if they're more prepared than what they were against Ohio State, because it was
Yeah,
a lot of self-inflicted wounds towards the end of the first half
right.
and beginning a second half that seemingly ended that game. And then the winner of this one takes on number 2 Georgia, who when 2 weeks ago they nearly lost to Georgia Tech, and you're wondering, are they even going to be where are they going to be in this
Yeah,
entire thing? Now they win the SEC and they've got the bye in the number 2 overall seed. So it was just interesting to see this first year of the 12-team
yeah,
playoff. And I will
yeah,
say I was glad to see SMU get in. I just, given the way that they competed, given the way they came back in that ACC championship, I never quite understood the idea of punishing a team for losing a conference
yeah.
championship game. And so I was glad to see the committee at least valued that going into this first year.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, again, you get into the argument or the comparison of, you know, best team or most deserving team, when you get down to that point.
No doubt.
And so let's say Alabama was the odd man out, probably. It wasn't going to be Miami, another team from the same conference. So let's say it's Alabama with a 9-3 record. I think a lot of people would say if Alabama and SMU played 10 times, Alabama would probably win 8 of those times.
Yep.
And that's probably true. And so that's why people would have thought that Alabama should have gotten that. But they had a chance to make it in. They lost 3 games. They lost to Vanderbilt, right? I mean, so they had opportunities to prove themselves that it should have been a no doubter, a no brainer that they're in, and they didn't do that. So I have no problem with the way this played out. I think it makes for an interesting mix of teams, and it should be a lot of fun to watch. Now, you mentioned Georgia. Um, I really kind of, even though they struggled against Georgia Tech, when they beat Texas again, I kind of thought Georgia's going to make it all the way to the finals. But now,
Yep.
with Carson Beck and the question about him, and it's very vague right now coming out of Athens what his injury status is. Apparently, it's his right elbow, maybe his UCL. He may be done, and so I don't think any team can make a run in the playoff in this year's version with a backup quarterback.
And it's not like the first year of the 14 playoff where Ohio State rides it back up and somehow they end up on the mountaintop. But it will be interesting. Georgia's a certain case. The Alabama conversation is the right one. And beyond the Vanderbilt game, they had probably put that in the past enough with the way they had played the rest of the season. But the Oklahoma loss was inexcusable. A
Yeah,
24-point favorite going
right,
into that game, and to
right,
lose convincingly at that. It's not just the loss, it was
right.
how they lost as well. So definitely something to monitor as we move forward and see how they value things year to year, because I
Yeah,
do think that'll change year to year. But this year, the conference championship games were clearly valued
yeah.
across the board. And I think
You,
we see that reflected.
I just want to go back to something you mentioned about Ohio State in that first year of the playoffs in 2014 when they got down to Cardale Jones, their third team quarterback. I mean, those days are gone in college football too
Yeah.
because of the transfer portal and NIL. There aren't any teams that I can think of other than Texas right now that has a high level quality backup in line to come in and play if things go bad with the starter, if the starter gets injured. The days of keeping, multiple quarterbacks on your roster that are all talented enough to be starters if they're given the opportunity, that's just not happening anymore in college football.
The one that would be curious for me, and look, the hope is that we don't ever have to see it yet, and we'll wait till next year. But Oregon has Dante Moore, who is a highly touted kid
Right.
behind Dylan Gabriel, and the hope for them is that he's their quarterback of the future. But you're right; it's just not a thing anymore because
Yeah.
guys seek other opportunities, and that is what makes Texas so unique. Let's just quickly go through some other bowl games for Big Ten teams. Rate Bowl, you've got Rutgers and Kansas State. Rutgers, 7 regular season wins for the first time since 2014, second straight year in a bowl game. The SRS Distribution, Las Vegas Bowl, A&M and USC. The Bad Boy Mowers Pinstripe Bowl. Why are all these names getting
I
longer by the
I don't
year?
even say those. I just say the Pinstripe Bowl. I mean, if we're not on, if they're not on our network and we're not covering the game, we're not obligated to say the sponsors
I'm
anymore.
with you on that. I like the
Okay.
mentality. So the
Okay.
Pinstripe Bowl, which is feels like every time Syracuse gets to 6 wins, they're automatically in there. Not this year.
Right.
Boston
Right.
College is the other team that always seems to find their way there. They'll take on Nebraska, and Nebraska's first bowl game since 2016. It'll be a cold one, so they'll have to be prepared for that. The Music City Bowl, Iowa and Missouri. Missouri was top 20 in the final CFP rankings. We know Iowa can hang with anybody, especially defensively. Will be interesting to see who starts, especially at quarterback in that
Yeah.
game. The ReliaQuest Bowl, this was definitely one that you kind of take a step back and say, this is odd
Yeah.
considering how the seasons went. But Alabama takes on Michigan. You've got 9-3 Alabama as the first team out of the playoff, and 7-5 Michigan coming off the Ohio State win, but just
Yeah.
struggled offensively through the season. And then,
The unique thing about this matchup is so earlier in the regular season, and we did the game, it was a rematch of last year's national championship game where Michigan played Washington out in Seattle and Washington beat them. This is a rematch of their semifinal game against Alabama when Michigan won 27-20. Again, new coaches, new players, new rosters, all that. So I don't know how much carryover. And really, the thing with all these bowl games,
yeah,
um, the question is who all is going to play. You know, I mean, the transfer portal is open now. It opened December 9th. It's open till December 28th. How many guys are going to opt out of playing in these games? How many guys are going to already make a decision to go somewhere else? That's one of the negative um, trade-offs, I guess, of the transfer portal. I think there's a lot of good about it, but the number of guys that will opt out of these games is going to be significant, you know. And particularly, I look at a game like Texas A&M and USC. I mean, this is what the Las Vegas Bowl could be the disappointment bowl, right? Two teams that had great expectations coming into the year and kind of struggled down the stretch, and it's an oh by the way bowl game. How many top tier players are going to play in this game for either team. Now, the game that I do think is going to be really fun to watch is the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl. I think the matchup of South Carolina and Illinois, I think you're going to have two teams that are really going to be happy to be there,
yep.
feel great about their seasons. South Carolina was playing really well down the stretch. Illinois had an excellent year winning 9 games, and nobody expected them to be that good. So I think this is a game that will be fun to watch. Two teams that are really going to go at it to try to get the win.
Brett Bielema's team was honored at the half of their basketball game the other night against Wisconsin, and you could see just grinning ear to ear every player, including Luke Altmaier. Just
Yeah.
he had a big smile on his face. So very cool to see that. And the final bowl game for a Big Ten team that we didn't mention, the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Who will be
Yes.
doused in mayo at the end? Will it be PJ Fleck? Because he basically puts that in his coffee. He comes close to putting that, excuse me, in his
Right.
Diet Coke.
Right.
Either
Right.
way, Minnesota takes on Virginia Tech, and I can tell you, I have a decent feeling that Minnesota is going to have the majority of their roster playing in that one as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and Minnesota, you know, really they had a very good year. I mean, they were close to, you know, winning a couple other games. Could have beaten Penn State, had Penn State on the ropes at home late in the year, and weren't able to come away with the victory. But yeah, I think they'll put their best foot forward. This will be Max Brosmer final college football game. Made a great transition from FCS to Minnesota this year, and they'll be fun to watch in the bowl game as well.
Sun Bowl's Louisville and Washington. We'll see Damon Williams likely starting again for that one, and the future for Washington as we get set in bowl season. It also leaves us into next season as we're excited for another year of Big Ten
Yeah.
football on NBC. We had a great year this year with the new teams coming in, and we look forward to the 2025 schedule. Big Ten teams are all going to play 9-game conference schedule, 3 non-conference games. It makes sure that each team plays everybody at least twice, once home and once away, with rotating opponents it's 3 times or 3 years in a 3 times in a 5-year period. But the marquee matchups that we do know, including some non-conference games, the biggest one is Ohio State hosting Texas to start the year August 30th. That'll be just off the charts good. And then the first week of Big Ten action will be on September 13th. USC going to Purdue, Oregon goes to Northwestern. Penn State hosts Oregon in this coming year, September 27th, the rematch of the Big Ten championship game that just feels like a guaranteed whiteout game no matter
Yeah.
what time it is. Indiana goes to Oregon and goes to Penn State. So all the chat about maybe some of
Yeah.
their softer schedule this year is going to look a little different. You've got USC at Notre Dame, which we'll have on NBC October 18th. Penn State at Ohio State. So flip flop what we saw this year in a big time matchup November 1st. And then, of course, the game Michigan at Ohio State. Can the Buckeyes put an end to the 4 straight wins
Actually,
for the
that would be the
Wolverines?
other way. That would
You're
be
you're right. That would be
yeah,
in Ann
that would
Arbor.
be in
So
Ann Arbor next year.
it would
Yep.
be November 29th. Either way, that would be a lot of fun. And then the Big Ten championship game, December 6th, 2025. So some big matchups, and
Yeah.
certainly things will take more shape as they did every year as the
Yeah.
season goes on.
And the thing to watch now, again, we're in a different era of college football. So between now and the end of this transfer portal, and the early signing period is happening right now, where a lot of high school players are making their final decisions and their commitments. Then you'll have a spring portal window after spring football. So by the time we get to those matchups in August and September, there'll be a lot of reshuffling and resorting out the rosters of who's playing where and what these teams look like, because they'll definitely be different looking than they are right now.
I've got 2 teams in particular that I'm keeping my eye on for next year. That one was barely bowl eligible this year, one just missed out on bowl eligibility this year. I think Michigan State and Washington will be 2 of the more interesting teams in the Big Ten next year. I think we saw the makings of what Michigan State can build if they properly bring in the right talent around a young quarterback and a stud freshman receiver and a great head coach. And then certainly Washington, we know
Yeah.
what Jed Fish is capable of in terms of turning around a program. Those are the 2 teams I'll be really looking forward to next year.
Yeah, I mean, two really excellent coaching staffs. It'll be interesting to see now whether Steve Belichick, who I thought did an outstanding
Yeah.
job with the defense, whether he's going to stay there, whether he's going to join his dad in Chapel Hill. You would think that he would go there, but who knows? Maybe he's happy with kind of doing his own thing and carving out his own resume and name and all of that. But their coaching staff is an excellent coaching staff, and they'll retool their roster. It'll be all their guys now that they're bringing in and tapping into. So, yeah, I agree. I think both of those coaching staffs are quality coaching staffs, and those teams will be better next year.
2 great options for Steve Belichick, Seattle or Chapel Bill. We shall see. Xfinity Big Connections. You mentioned that we've got an in-state matchup in the college football playoff first round as Notre Dame hosts Indiana, despite being just 200 miles apart. The other thing you said, these teams haven't really played much over the
Yeah.
years. They first played in 1898. Indiana won the game 11-5, which is like an Iowa score right now. I
Yeah.
think that we actually did a game that might have been 11-5. That was in South Bend. IU hasn't beaten the Irish since 1950. It was a 20-7 win at home. But the last matchup between the schools, 1991, Notre Dame dominated 49-27. 23 wins in 29 games go to Notre Dame. There was one tie between the two. They are set to play a home and home in 2030 and 2031. Big time football matchup now in this
Yeah.
current iteration for a state that is so known for basketball.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. I mean, I think it'll be a fun game to watch. Again, I already said earlier, Notre Dame's playing as well as anybody right now down the stretch. Indiana did not put their best foot forward in their biggest game of the year against Ohio State. You mentioned self-inflicted wounds. They just didn't play their best, and they were all year. They have been marked by their efficiency on offense, defense, and special teams. Very well coached, very efficient. They did not play that way against Ohio State,
Yeah.
and part of that is the caliber of opponent that they were facing. But they were able to kind of put that behind them, blow out their rival Purdue to finish the year and build some momentum. And I really think that the one area I do kind of think Curtis Rourke gives them a chance in this game. I think he's had a brilliant year. We've talked about Dylan Gabriel. We've talked about Riley Leonard, at times at Notre Dame, some of the other transfer quarterbacks. But Curtis Rourke has played marvelously. He missed a couple games when he was hurt with the thumb. He's 100% healthy, and this will be a highly motivated team. Kurt Cignetti will come in there with a giant chip on his shoulder, as will most of the guys on that roster. Like they're the little brother in the state of Indiana coming into this one.
Yeah, and not all of them are from Indiana because a lot came from James Madison, but none
Right,
of them, in all likelihood, that came over to Indiana this year were recruited by Notre Dame.
right,
So I'm sure there's
right.
going to be some motivating factor there as we move to some fan submitted questions presented by Xfinity. The first one is: does Oregon have the toughest path to the championship? This was something that I brought up.
Yeah.
The second part of that is: there any chance to an all Big Ten championship matchup? Let's start with the path that they've got in front of them,
Yeah, I mean, and that's just the luck of the draw, right? I mean,
or unluck.
yeah, or unluck of the draw. And I've read some things about this, and really, you would think if you're the number one seed that you shouldn't have to play an 8 or a 9 seed in your first game. You would think that it would be seeded all the way through, like they do in the basketball tournament. But that's the way it is this year. I don't know if they'll tweak that or look at it any differently going forward, but it certainly is a tough path. I mean, if you compare, okay, the two teams that played in the Big Ten championship game. You compare Oregon having to play either Tennessee or Ohio State, and then having to play potentially Texas to get to the finals, as opposed to Penn State playing SMU, and then potentially, if they win, playing Boise State. It's a much different path, and so it's a very difficult path for the number one team. But again, once you get to this point, every game is going to be a challenge. Every game that I don't know that we'll see many blowouts in these college football playoff games.
It's what makes it fun. And you mentioned the NCAA basketball tournament. The best part about it is there's upsets and there's
Yep.
weird things that happen. But at the same time, most of the time, one of the best teams is the last one standing. And I think that's what we're going to see here as well. So,
As far as the question of an all Big Ten, I think there is a possibility, um, and I think we could see, or I think Oregon's going to make it to the finals. Um, I think Penn State has the best chance of making it there to face them. However, I think Notre Dame has a better chance of beating Penn State than the other way around if it gets to that. That's kind of how I had it playing out. Again, a week ago, I had Georgia making it all the way to the finals to play for the national championship again. I love the way their defense plays and just how they get up for big games, but not without Carson Beck and their starting quarterback.
could be fascinating. The Dan Lanning versus Kirby Smart,
Yeah,
the protege versus the professor, if you will. Professor Blackledge, we get you putting your lab coat on and dropping some science on us. It always makes
right.
the day better. But
Yeah.
someone did ask me, they said, if Oregon were to win this year, would this be the toughest national championship or the craziest path or whatever it was? I don't think you can say that yes or no. It's going to be one of them. But I remember that LSU Joe Burrow team, all the teams they had to play. It was a murderer's row of their
Yeah.
schedule, and they went undefeated. It would be the first time a team, I believe, went 16-0 though, en route
Yeah.
to a national championship. So we'll see what they have in store. But exciting stuff ahead, TB.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm actually really looking forward to it. We get to go call an NFL game, which is going to be fun. We'll get to watch the Friday night game from South Bend, which is going to be really exciting to see. And then we'll get done with our game and get to go somewhere and watch the two other college football playoff games. So it'll be a really fun weekend of college and pro football.
Yeah, the cool thing about this year as well is normally to get the top tier, highest level of college football bowl games or at the time 14 playoff, you got to wait nearly a month. And in
Yeah.
this case, we're waiting essentially
Yeah.
2 weeks, and then here we are.
Yep.
We've got great college football back on. So that's really good for the sport, really good for all the fans. And we appreciate all those fans tuning in to Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity. Make sure you download and subscribe on the NBC Sports YouTube channel and wherever you get your audio podcast. We appreciate you for joining us this season, and we will talk to you soon.